So hello and welcome to this NPTEL course entitled 20th Century Fiction, where we're looking at and examining James Joyce's novel Ulysses. So we've seen already certain sections where the streams of consciousness technique is used very effectively by Joyce, and how the mindscape or the landscape, they correspond with each other. And obviously this is a story about one day in Dublin, but this one temporal frame is actually quite deceptively simple, because what is buried in this one day is a series of different temporal narratives, a series of different stories crisscrossing each other in a very postmodernist kind of a way. So there's this hyperlinked quality about Ulysses, where each story connects to another story and the different characters crisscrossing each other in different points of time. Now, obviously Leopold Bloom, who's a Jewish Irishman in Dublin over here, he is someone who works in an advertising company. He's someone who's canvassing for advertisement all the time. So he's a canvasser, essentially. So advertisement plays a very important role in Ulysses. So we have different advertising slogans booming in every now and then. But what that also means is this, everything can be turned into something flippant, because the whole idea of advertisement is to make things catchy, to condense meanings into a simple narrative which can be dished out and consumed very, very quickly. So if you remember the earlier section in Ulysses where Bloom and his wife Molly Bloom, they talk about a very spiritual term, metempsychosis, which is a transmigration of souls. And obviously metempsychosis becomes a spiritual, metaphysical kind of a conceit, but that very quickly cuts into the change of a kidney, the kidney which is being cooked in the kitchen, which becomes overcooked and overburnt. Right, so the burning of a kidney into something else, something non-edible, is very interestingly conjoined and juxtaposed with this whole idea of metempsychosis, which is a transition or transmigration, etc. Now, in this section that we'll look at today is Bloom realizing how the whole idea of his country becomes important over here, the nation becomes important over here, and how suddenly the imagination of a nation becomes like a glimpse in his advertisement, soaked imagination. So everything is an advertisement for him, and suddenly he sees, he thinks of Ireland as a nation, and how he realizes how he's never really seen his country except in little glimpses. And this is a section which should be on the screen. This is Leopold Bloom reminiscing about this nation and thinking about how he hasn't seen most parts of his own country. And this is on the screen in the mirror, which I'm going to read out. Strange, he never saw his real country, Ireland, my country. Member for the College Green, he boomed that workday worker tag for all it is worth. It's the ads and side features seller weekly, not a stale news in the official gazette. Queen Anne is dead, published by authority in the year 1000 and domestically situated in the townland of Rosenellis, barony of Tidderhenge, to all whom it may concern, schedule pursuant to statute showing a return a number of mules and jennets exported from Ballina, nature notes, cartoons, Phil Blake's weekly pattern bull story, Uncle Toby's page for tiny tots, country bumpkins queries. Dear Mr. Editor, what is a good cure for flatulence? I'd like that part. Learn a lot teaching others. A personal note. MAP. Mainly all pictures. Shapely bathers on golden stand. World's biggest balloon. Double marriage of sisters celebrated. Two bridegrooms laughing heartily at each other. Companion 2. Printer. More Irish than the Irish. So, the whole idea of stylization becomes important over here. The reason why I read out these random sections from Ulysses, he has a series of different kinds of advertisement politics or advertisement narratives which are at play with each other over here. And obviously what that means is that, the entire idea of meaning becomes stylized, meaning becomes sliced into small pieces and dished out, right? And obviously the stylization makes, something more Irish than the Irish. That's a very important line over here, which is something that I want to spend a little bit of time in. So the whole point of making something more Irish than the Irish is obviously artificially injecting Irishness as a stylized category. So Irishness over here is not really a national or cultural category anymore. Irishness over here becomes a stylized category, something which is consumed as a stylized section of meaning. Okay, so stylization and this incessant, endless production of meanings, half-chopped meanings into small condensed sentences becomes very much a part of the meaning landscape in Ulysses, because as you can see, in the entire story, most of it, apart from these sections talking about Molly Bloom and Stephen Dedalus, is focalized through Leopold Bloom. So focalization becomes a very important factor in Ulysses. Focalization, of course, means that the entire story is told from a certain perspective. It's a camera term, focalization. The perspective is set, and that perspective is a perspective which is used to control and deliver a story, right? So focalization is a way to an ad man's imagination. The machines clanked in 3-4 time, thump, thump, thump. Now, if he got paralyzed there and no one knew how to stop them, they'll clank on and on the same, printed over and over and up and back. Monkey doodle, the whole thing, want a cool head. So again, the whole idea of being consumed by machines become important over here, because the machines are clanking in incessantly, thump, 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 and he just visualizes an image where if he gets to this machine, this printing machine, they'll just print on him incessantly, and they'll make some monkey doodle out of his body, out of his organic body. Well, get it into the evening edition, Councillor, Haynes said. Soon he, calling him by Lord Mayor, Lord John is backing him, they say. The foreman, with an answering, scribbled press on a corner of the sheet and made a sign to a typesetter. He handed the sheet silently over the dirty glass screen. Right, thanks, Haynes said, moving off. Mr. Bloom stood in his way. If you want to draw, the cashier is just going to lunch, he said, pointing backwards with his thumb. Did you? Haynes asked. Mr. Bloom said, look sharp and you'll catch him. Thanks, old man, Haynes said, I'll tap him too. He hurried on eagerly towards the Freeman's Journal. 3 bob to lent him and Megas, 3 weeks, third hint. So again, look at the way in which information becomes very stylized in Ulysses. So this person, Haynes, he had borrowed some money from Leopold Bloom, and Bloom meets him on the way to work. And this is obviously part of a printing machine room in which the two people meet. And he's dropping hints and asking him to deliver or return his money. So he tells Haynes that there's a cashier. The cashier's over there. So if you catch him, he might lend you some cash in advance, lend you some money in advance, some of your salary in advance. And obviously what he's trying to tell is, I lent you 3 bob. I lent you 3, Irish currency, some time back, 3 weeks ago, and I've given you the third hint. So the recurrence of 3 obviously becomes important. 3 bob, 3 weeks, third hint, which is obviously the triple tree, the 9, which is a holy number for Christians. And obviously Christianity in Ulysses becomes a very interesting form of representation. It's a form of consumption and also a form of representation. So 3 bob I lent him in a Megas, 3 weeks, third hint. So the triple tree which makes it 9, makes us a very flippant representation, and gets a very flippant representation in this particular section. Okay, so and then of course this conversation between Bloom's and Mr. Nanetti becomes interesting. Mr. Bloom laid his cutting on Mr. Nanetti's desk. Excuse me, councillor, he said, this ad, you see, keys, remember? Mr. Nanetti considered the cutting a while and nodded. He wants it in for July, Mr. Bloom said. The foreman moved his pencil towards it. But wait, Mr. Bloom said, he wants it changed. Keys, he said, he wants 2 keys on the top. Hell of a racket they make. He doesn't hear it, Nanan. Iron nerves, maybe he understands what I. The foreman turned round to hear patiently, and lifting an elbow, began to scratch slowly in the armpit of his opaque jacket. Like that, Mr. Bloom said, crossing his 4 fingers at the top. Let him take that in first. Mr. Bloom, glancing sideways up from the cross he had made, saw the foreman's sallow face, thinks he has a touch of jaundice, and beyond the obedient reels feeding in a huge web of paper, clank it, miles of it unreeled. What becomes of it after? Oh, wrap up meat, parcels, various uses, thousands and one things. So again, this imagery is very symbolic, because we are quite literally in the belly of a printing machine, and the intestines of a printing machine, and this is a printing press in operation. So Mr. Bloom is having a conversation with a foreman who's obviously hard of hearing, because he's always surrounded by so much amplified noise. And the amplification is obviously part of the machinery production process. Everything is amplified, which is the same thing, the same representation form of stylization. The stylization, amplification, these become the major forms of representation over here, right? And Mr. Bloom comes in here with a suggestion to change the keys, certain things need to be changed in a particular advertisement. Now, as it stands, they're looking at the reels and reels of paper, which is laid together in one form will become a mile. He wonders what will happen of it afterwards. So again, the whole idea of transformation becomes important. And then if you go back to the section of metempsychosis, which is supposed to be a spiritual metaphysical transformation, look at the way in which metempsychosis plays out in different mundane vulgar reality or vulgar materiality, such as, for instance, talking about the printing press paper. What happens to newspaper once it is consumed? It becomes a wrap for parcels, different kinds of parcels. Clank it, miles of it unreeled. What becomes of it after? Oh, wrap up meat, parcels, various users, 1,001 things. So usability, functionality is part of the transition, part of the change away. So the spirituality of metempsychosis, the metaphysicality of metempsychosis is now almost caricatured in the materiality of changes, the materiality of different kinds of usability in terms of a newspaper. What happens to a newspaper post a newspaper, post its consumption, it becomes a parcel, a wrap for different kinds of things, vulgar things. Slipping his words deftly into the pauses of the clanking, he drew swiftly on his card woodwork, house of keys. Like that, you see. Two cross keys here, a circle. Then here the name, Alexander Keys, tea, wine and spirit, merchant, so on. So these are obviously advertisement indications, different kinds of indicators for advertisement. Better not teach him his own business. You know what, counsellor? Just what he wants. Then around the top in land leaded, in that particular section, the house of keys, you see. Do you think that's a good idea? The foreman moved his scratching head towards the lower ribs and scratched there quietly. Now, if you look at the movement of the foreman, there's something almost mythical about him. It's almost like this mythical figures who know everything, see everything, but are too exhausted to speak. So the foreman over here is situated inside the machinery of the printing press. He doesn't respond, he's just receiving commands and is moving in a very, very almost automatic, a zombie-like way, a very numbed way. So he moved his scratching head towards lower ribs and scratched there quietly. He's not really responding, he's just getting information, he's just getting orders and instructions from different people. And he's just standing beside the machine, so he in a sense becomes the machine. So again, you can make an interesting comparison with this foreman over here and the typewriter of Eliot's Wasteland. If you remember Eliot's Wasteland, the section of the typewriter and the carbuncular clerk, they have this loveless sex, and the sexual activity obviously is numbing in quality. And right after the clerk goes away, the typist, who's also called a typewriter, the typist, she has this half thought which passes her brain, and then she puts the gramophone on record, puts the record on gramophone in a very numbed-like way. So the foreman over here and the typist in its wasteland are very similar figures. Both are consumed by this cannibalistic quality of modernist machines, the modern machines, such as the typewriter and the printing press. Okay. The idea, Mr. Bloom said, is a house of keys. Councillor, the Manx Parliament, innuendo of Home Rule, tourists, from the Isle of Man, catches the eye, you see. Can you do that? So again, the whole idea of catching the eye becomes important. So in that sense, Ulysses becomes, among other things, as a great work of literature, it's a great work on the stream of consciousness, but it's also a story about advertisements. It's also a story about how to advertise things, how to make something sellable, how to form representational frameworks, which are dishy, which are attractive in quality. So that becomes a large part of the narrative landscape of Ulysses, as you can see. Okay, and now this is a section where he walks past a typesetter, and a typesetter distributing letters, and this is what he says, and this should be on the screen. He stayed in his walk to watch a typesetter neatly distributing type. Reads it backwards first. Quickly he does it. Must require some practice that. Mangi D K Seta P. So it's doing it backwards. Again, the letters form backwards. Letters randomized in a very, very interesting fashion. Poor Papa with his Haggadah book, reading backwards with his finger to me. Passage next in Jerusalem, dear, oh dear, all the long business about that brought us out of the land of Egypt and into the house of bondage. Alleluia, Shema Israel, Adonai, Elohim. That's the other. Then the 12 brothers, Jacob's son, and then the lamb, and the cat, and the dog, and the stick, and the water, and the butcher. And then the angel of death kills the butcher, and he kills the ox, and the dog kills the cat. Sounds a bit silly till you come to look into it well. justice it means, but it's everyday eating everyone else, everybody eating everyone else. That's what life is after all. How quickly he does the job. Practice makes perfect, seems to see with his fingers. So again, look at the way in which something so material and mechanical and almost flippant and vulgar is conjoined very interestingly with something spiritual. So the whole reference to Jerusalem is brought in over here. The whole reference to cannibalism is brought in over here. And then of course it cuts into the typesetter setting up the different types. And this idea, this very nihilistic idea of life is something which is interesting over here, where he says that justice all means, but it's everybody eating everybody else. That's what life is after all. So it becomes a series of cannibalism, which comes from the mythical tradition, which comes from the prehistoric times of the movement of the Jews across the world, and the lamb and the cat and the dog and the stick and the water and the butcher, everyone's consuming everyone else. And also that idea of consumption is now translated into science. How is science consumed in the advertisement industry, and how is science consumed by people watching advertisements? Right, so advertisements become a very big part of the flippant process through which the machinery production of meaning takes place. Now, if you remember the scene in Mrs. Dalloway, where the shell-shocked soldier Septimus Smith is walking around London, and he suddenly sees this advertisement on the sky, the advertisement producing aeroplane, which is advertising for toffee, and then how the letters form across the sky in little clouds. The letters are little clouds which are produced as vapors from the plane, the advertisement aeroplanes, and how the letters come together to make meaning, to make a sign which has a certain kind of meaning, and that meaning making, the production of meanings, as it were, to an advertisement process is exactly what is mentioned over here by Bloom, and that is very much akin to cannibalism. That is very much akin to the consumption of science and meaning. So cannibalism and consumption are equated with each other. That's what is indicated or mentioned when Bloom reflects on this fact. That's what life is after all. How quickly he does the job. Practice makes perfect, seems to see with his fingers. Now Mr. Bloom passed on out of the clanking noises to the gallery onto the landing. Now am I going to tram it out of the way and then catch him out perhaps? Better phone him up first. Number? Yes, same as Citron's house, 28 00. Only once more than soap. Again, look at the way in which these random lines come in Ulysses. It's almost like different kinds of voices, echoes, choric voices. And again, this is interesting because this is part of the Hellenic tradition of writing. So the advertisements over here, the advertising voices over here, they play a part like very similar to the Greek chorus. The chorus which will come in and comment on the situation, but also stylize the situation, because a part of the chorus, part of the choric character of the original Greek plays is to comment and stylize the situation, make it into a condensed narrative, and then dish it out for the audience as a commentary as well as a condensation. He went down the house staircase. Who the deuce scrawled all over these walls with matches? Looks as if they did it for a bet. Heavy, greasy smell that's always in those works. Lukewarm gloom in Tom's next door when I was here. He took out his handkerchief to dab his nose. Citron lemon? The soap I put there. Lose it out of the pocket. Put him back his handkerchief and took out the soap and stored it away, buttoned in the hip pocket of his trousers. What perfume does the wife use? I could go home still. Tram, something I forgot, just to see before dressing. No, here, no. A sudden screech of laughter came from the Evening Telegraph office. Know who that is? What's up? Pop in a minute to the phone. Ned Lambert it is. He entered softly. Erin, green gem of the silver sea. So again, the different kinds of voices come in as advertisement. Erin, the green gem of the silver sea, and before that a certain kind of soap was being advertised. And also notice the way this one-liners of advertisements are cut into Bloom's consciousness. So how consciousness, which is obviously seen as an abstract metaphysical thing, is actually informed by the materiality of science, by the materiality of advertisements over here. This one-liners which are seen as flippant meanings. The flippancy of one-liners is what is actually informing consciousness over here and triggering different thought processes. So if you look at the way the thought processes operate in Ulysses, that actually materially produce. It's not something which happens out of abstraction. He consumes the material meaning around him, the material markers around him, the material science around him, and in the process of consumption, he produces thought processes. He produces different kinds of abstract thought processes which link into each other, forming a stream of consciousness. So the stream of consciousness in Ulysses is not really an abstract phenomenon at all. It is something which is materially manufactured due to the consumption of science around him, this endless consumption of science around him. Okay, now we come to the section where quite literally, there's a relation about stream of consciousness, a description of the stream of life becoming a consciousness, and how life and consciousness are related to each other in forms of a streaming process, and this should be on the screen. Stream of life. What was the name of that priestly-looking chap who was always squinting, and when he passed, weak eyes, woman, stopped at Citron St. Kevin's Parrot, pen something, pen Dennis, my memory is getting pen. Of course, it was years ago, noise of the trams probably. Well, if he couldn't remember the day father's name that he sees every day. So again, memory becomes a large part of it, and also look at the way in which memory and machine are related to each other. So the loss of memory, the weakening of memory is attributed away to the noise of the trams, right? Bartolo Darcy was a tenor just coming out then, seeing her home after practice, conceited fellow with his waxed up moustache, gave her the song The Winds That Blew from the South. One night that I was, when I went to fetch her, that was lodge meeting on about those lottery tickets after Goodwin's concert in a super room or oak room of the mansion house. He and I behind. Sheet of her music blew out of my hand against the high school railings. Lucky it didn't. Thinks that spoils the effect of a night for her. Professor Goodwin linking her in front, shaking on his pens. Poor old sod. His farewell concerts, positively last appearance on any stage, maybe for months or maybe for never. Remembering her laughing at the wind, her bizarre collar up. Corner of Harcourt Road, remember that Gus Brifu blew up all the skirts and her bow nearly smothered old Goodwin. She did get flush in the wind. Remember when we got home raking up the fire and frying up those pieces of lap of mutton for a supper with the chutney sauce she liked and the mulled rum. Could see her in the bedroom from the hearth unclamping the busk of her stays, white. So again, look at the way in which different kinds of color sensations, sound sensations, tactile sensations all come back in a flush in Bloom's mind as he remembers an experience of Molly Bloom coming back from a concert over here. So memory becomes a very large part in Ulysses. Memory and consciousness become a large part of identity in Ulysses. So how far can you remember becomes a large part of how well you can live. So your entire possession of life, your entire ownership in life, in a way, depends on memory, depends on your navigation with memory. And the navigation with memory can only take place in certain senses. So sensory perceptions are foregrounded. Colors, sound, tactile sensations, smells, all this become large chunks of memory narratives across Ulysses. Okay. Swish and soft flop of her stays made on the bed, always warm for her, always liked to let herself out. Sitting there after till near 2 taking out a halfpence, Millie tucked in a Betty house, happy, that was a night. Oh, Mr. Bloom, how do you do? Oh, how do you do, Mrs. Breen? No use complaining. How is Molly those times? Haven't seen her for ages. In the pink, Mr. Bloom said gaily. Millie has a position down in Mullingar, you know her? Go away, isn't it grand for her? And the photographer's there, getting on like a house on fire. How are all your charges? On the baker's list, Mrs. Breen said. How many has she? No other in sight. You're on the black. I see you have no. No, Mr. Bloom said. I've just come from a funeral. So again, look at the way in which her present conversation, the present, just keeps invading back into the memory and reverie that Mr. Bloom is experiencing. So he's having this reveries when he's transporting into the past, and suddenly this little flippant conversation, this cutting in of the present becomes a way, or occurs a way to this seemingly innocuous questions, this random passers-by that he sees, he encounters, the familiar faces he encounters. They ask him questions which bring him back to the present. So it's reverie. So the temporality politics is very interesting. So it's constantly moving back and forwards in time. And this is what I meant at the beginning of this lecture when I said that the entire temporal frame in Ulysses, the calendar frame is one day, the clock frame is one day. That's a very superficial structure. So within that superficial structure, we have deep embedded narratives of temporality running across each other, crisscrossing each other in a very hyperlinked kind of a way. Right, so the Joycean day is just one day in which different kinds of days, different kinds of histories and memory narratives are operative. Okay. And then, of course, this reference to Dignam happens again. Mr. Bloom is asked why he's wearing black, why he's in mourning, and he says, Dignam, Mr. Bloom said, an old friend of mine, he died quite suddenly, poor fellow, heart trouble, I believe, funeral was this morning. So we've already seen that how, and again, even the funeral, which is again, the overarching narrative metempsychosis was taking place, everyone becomes soil and dust. And Mr. Bloom, obviously, Lupa Bloom over there, he mediated that image in his mind to the image of the gramophone, where he says that every voice can be recorded inside a grave using a gramophone. So again, the machine, the mundane and the metaphysical, they mix together in very interesting ways. Okay, so, and then of course, the whole idea of sensoriness becomes important, and I'll stop at this point. Hot, mock turtle vapor and stream of new-baked jam puffs, roly-poly, poured out of Harrison's. The heavy noon rake tickled on the top of Mr. Bloom's gullet. Want to make good pastry, butter, best flour, demerara sugar, or they tasted with a hot tea, or is it for her? From her, a barefoot Arab stood over the grating, breathing in the fumes, deadened the gnaw of hunger that way. Pleasure or pain is it? Penny dinner, knife and fork chained to the table. So again, the whole point over here is interesting because this obviously references certain sensory feelings. The smell of tea, the smell of butter, the whole idea of eating becomes a sensory experience. But this ambivalence about pain or pleasure becomes important over here because when these different kinds of senses mix over here, what happens is this becomes an example of what we call synesthesia, where different sense perceptions crisscross each other. So what you smell traditionally also becomes something which can be touched. So what can be touched also becomes something which you can hear. So different sense perceptions crisscross each other in a very heightened, sentient situation, and that becomes a very recursive phenomenon in Ulysses to a large extent. Okay, so the last section that we'll deal with today is, again, it includes trams. So trams become, this is an important issue, trams become very important machines, very important symbolic machines in Ulysses, because trams cut back and across human thought processes in Ulysses. So every time Leopold Bloom has a thought process or has a sensation or experience, trams cut back and across it. So trams are not just innocuous machines over here. Trams become symbols of mobility of thoughts, movement of thoughts, and they also become interruptions in thought processes. So they become the very complex machinic presence and human streams of consciousness in this particular novel, and this should be on the screen. Trams pass one another, ingoing, outgoing, clanging. So the liminality of movement, the liminality of time, coming in and going out simultaneously, is indicated by the movement of trams in Dublin, and obviously trams become like veins and arteries, the nervous system, as it were, of the Dublin city. Useless words, things go on the same day after day, squads of police marching out, back, trams in, out. Those two loonies mooching about, Dignam carted off, Mena Purfroy, swollen belly on a bed, groaning to have a child, tucked out of her. One born every second somewhere, others dying every second. Since I fed the birds 5 minutes, 300 kicked the bucket, others 300 born, washing the blood off, all are washing the blood of the lamb, boiling mass. Again, the whole idea of liminality of life and death, the simultaneity of life and death has been indicated over here. But also look at the way in the very mundane material markers over here, which are used to describe certain very almost metaphysical, this is like a spiritual, profound thought processes. There's simultaneity of life and death processes happening together all the time. And trams come in and go. There's a movement of trams coming in and leaving. They become indicators of life and death, and a life emerging in and life departing you. Right? So trams become very important symbolic machines, symbolic instruments of thought processes over here. They almost become instruments of epiphany to a certain extent in Ulysses. And obviously the reference to Dignam, who's a dead man over here, Mina Purfoy about to have a child, so one child born every second somewhere. Since I fed the birds 5 minutes, so the last 5 minutes since I fed the birds, Leopold Bloom is thinking 300 children must have been born and 300 others were dead. So the same blood processes happen all the time, same blood processes carrying on all the time in terms of life and death. And then we have this example of cityful passing away, other cityful coming, passing away to, others coming on, passing on. Houses, lines of houses, streets, miles of pavements, piled up bricks, stones, changing hands, this owner, that. Landlord never dies, they say. Others step into his shoes when he gets his notice to quit. They buy the place up with gold, and still they have all the gold. Swindle it somewhere, piled up in cities, worn away age after age, pyramids in sand, built on bread and onions, slave Chinese wall, Babylon, big stones left, round tires, rest rubble, sprawling suburbs, jerry-built, Kernan's mushroom houses built a breeze, shelter for the night. No one is anything. So I'll stop at this point today. Now this is obviously a very nihilistic thought, but the whole process of cityful passing away, another cityful coming. So the city becomes not just a physical landscape, the city also becomes a spiritual condition, a sentient condition. The city becomes an architectural epiphany. So the entire idea of a cityful is looking at a certain kind of human population, a certain stream of human population coming in. So again, a city becomes an instrument of streaming. So the stream of consciousness technique is also materialized and manifested in the city movements. So cityful passing away, another cityful coming, passing away to, others coming on, passing on. So the liminality movement, the coming and going of movement, is indicated to the cityfulness. So cityful becomes a quantifiable quality of consciousness away, or the stream of consciousness, as it were. And also look at the way in which the liminality of life, the simultaneous rise and fall in life, is described with some very material markers. And the material markers, they vary from the flippant landlord next door to the pyramids, the ancient pyramids. The ancient pyramids are obviously almost prehistoric in quality. The architecture of civilization, great civilization, which is almost prehistoric in quality, it's like so far back in time. And that is immediately conjoined together very complexly with the local landlords. So local landlords dying, someone else taking the place, so the money never goes away, people stepping in dead people's places. And of course, the last line is interesting, and that actually sums up the whole idea where no one is anything, right? So no one is anything means everything turns to nothingness at the end. And again, the nothingness produces something which then becomes nothing. So what is indicated over here is the cyclicity of life. Now, Ulysses' novel is obviously about cyclicity, and this is indicated also by the tram movements coming in and going in the stations. But that cyclicity gets a more postmodernist extension, a more postmodernist presentation if you read, for instance, Finnegan's Wake, which opens with a sentence which is a closing of the last sentence with which a novel ends. So the novel itself becomes structurally cyclical in quality, and that is something which is indicated in Ulysses as well in great modernist detail. So the stream of consciousness is obviously part of the cyclicity, and that is something which Ulysses keeps foregrounding and describing over and over again. So I stop at this point today, and I'll continue with this, and hopefully start to wind up these novels in the lectures to come. Thank you for your attention.